Good morning. My name is Julie Uchley. I'm doing the devotional today from Romans chapter 7, verses 14 through 25. If someone had asked you about 3 weeks ago to make a list of all the things you thought you could accomplish if you couldn't leave the house except to go to the grocery store or the doctor, and then you compared that list against the things you actually have gotten accomplished in these 3 weeks since you couldn't leave the house except to go to the grocery store or the doctor, if you're like me, there's a pretty big gap between those two things. I saw a funny meme that said, it turns out not having enough time was not the reason I couldn't clean my house. So today's verses are about a similar disconnect, about the gap between who we want to be and who we actually are. I'm going to read, this is kind of long, but I don't think I can say it better than Paul, so I will just read Romans chapter 7, verses 14 through 25. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind, and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself, in my mind, am a slave to God's law, but in the sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin. So I just wanted to share 3 thoughts from this passage today. The first is that Paul struggles. Paul, the great defender of the faith, the great missionary, the man who had such a powerful and literal conversion experience, he struggles. And not only does he struggle, he talks openly about it here and throughout Romans about this struggle. Romans is a letter to a church he's never been to in the most important city of the world, and yet Paul shares his struggle openly. And the point here is just a reminder that the Christian life is a daily discipline. It's not about achieving some level of perfection, and it's certainly not about pretending to have achieved that level of perfection to other people. The second point is how Paul characterizes this struggle. I think often those outside the Christian faith describe a Christian life as one of denial and limitation and restriction, and they contrast that with a life of freedom and of doing whatever you want outside the Christian faith. But that's not how Paul is describing it here. What he's doing the things he hates to do and he can't stop doing them, and that's not a life of freedom. Looking at the words he uses here, he talks about waging war against the law of my mind. He talks about being a prisoner of the law of sin. He crystallizes the choice in the second half of verse 25 by saying, you're either a slave to the law of God, or you're a slave to the law of sin. The point being, you're not free if you're living outside of God's law. Doing what you want to do is freedom, and Paul describes that freedom as coming through the power of Christ. The third point here is maybe the most encouraging, is that without Christ, this struggle ends with verse 24. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? And it's hopeless, and it's bleak, and it's dark. But with Christ, we get to keep reading through verse 25 that says, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. The answer to the struggle is not trying harder. It's not more guilt. It's not more effort. The answer is the same for us as it was for Paul. It's an acknowledgement that freedom comes through God and not through increasing reliance on our sinful nature. So that's my prayer for you today, that you would in fact do the things that you want to do and not do the things that you hate, and that you would acknowledge God as the source of that freedom. So that's it. Have a great day.